Have you ever wondered why certain people seem to enter your life only to leave behind pain? Why some people betray your trust, break your heart, disappoint you, or leave wounds that take years to heal? And why, out of the billions of people in the world, those particular individuals crossed your path at exactly the moment they did? Most people spend their lives believing these experiences were random, a mistake, an unfortunate coincidence, a chapter they wish had never happened. But the ancient Vedas reveal something profoundly different. They teach that the people who hurt you were not accidents. They were not random characters wandering through your story. They were mirrors, messengers, teachers disguised as painful experiences. Because sometimes the soul cannot awaken through comfort. Sometimes it awakens through disappointment. Sometimes the person who breaks your heart reveals more about your true self than the person who loves you. And sometimes the greatest transformation of your life begins with the very person you wish you had never met. Tonight we are going to explore a hidden teaching preserved within Vedic wisdom for thousands of years. A teaching that may completely change the way you see heartbreak, betrayal, rejection, abandonment, and every painful relationship you have ever experienced. Because by the end of this journey, you may discover that the people who hurt you were not sent to destroy your path. They were sent to reveal it. Some people enter your life to reveal your unhealed attachments. One of the deepest teachings hidden within Vedic wisdom is that not everything that feels like love is actually love. Sometimes what we call love is attachment, and attachment is far more dangerous than most people realize. Attachment begins the moment your inner peace becomes dependent on something outside yourself. It begins when your happiness starts depending on another person's presence, attention, approval, or affection. It begins when your mind quietly starts whispering, "I need this person to stay in order to feel whole. I need them to choose me in order to feel valuable. I need them to understand me in order to feel seen." At first, this attachment feels beautiful. It feels like connection. It feels like destiny. It feels like you have finally found someone who fills an empty space inside you. But the Vedas teach something profoundly different. They teach that no human being was sent to complete you, because the deepest part of your being was never incomplete to begin with. The true self, the eternal self that exists beneath the noise of the mind, has always been whole, always been complete, and always been enough. Yet most people spend years forgetting this truth, so they begin searching for completion in relationships. They search for it in romance. They search for it in admiration. They search for it in validation. They search for it in being chosen. And when they finally find someone who seems capable of filling that inner emptiness, they become attached without even realizing it. This is why certain people have the power to hurt us more than others, because they are not only touching our hearts, they are touching the places where we secretly believed we were incomplete. Think about it. Before that person entered your life, you may have felt relatively stable. You had your routines, you had your goals, you had your own rhythm. But then they arrived, and suddenly things began to change. Their messages could brighten your entire day. Their silence could darken it. Their attention felt like sunlight. Their distance felt like winter. You started checking your phone more often. You started overthinking small changes in their behavior. You started finding emotional meaning in every word they spoke and every word they did not speak. Without realizing it, your emotional center slowly began moving away from yourself and into their hands. And that is where suffering quietly begins. Because the moment another person becomes responsible for your inner peace, your freedom starts disappearing. Now your happiness depends on their consistency. Your confidence depends on their approval. Your sense of worth depends on their ability to recognize your value. And when they inevitably fail to carry that responsibility, which no human being was ever meant to carry, you experience pain. But according to the Vedas, this pain is not always punishment. Sometimes it is revelation. Sometimes life allows a painful experience because there is a truth you are ready to see. The person who hurt you may not have entered your life merely to break your heart, They may have entered your life to expose the invisible chains that were already wrapped around it. They revealed where your attachment was hiding. They revealed how much of your identity had become connected to another person's opinion. They revealed how much power you had unknowingly handed away. Perhaps they abandoned you. But in that painful moment, they revealed where you had abandoned yourself. Perhaps they rejected you. But in that rejection, they revealed how much of your self-worth had been placed in another person's hands. Perhaps they disappointed you. But through that disappointment, they exposed expectations that had quietly become emotional dependencies. And this realization changes everything, because eventually there comes a moment when the pain begins teaching a lesson that comfort never could. You begin seeing that your suffering is not only coming from what happened, it is also coming from what you were holding on to. You begin understanding that the deepest wound is often not the loss itself. The deepest wound is the belief that you needed that person in order to be complete. And once you see that illusion clearly, a powerful transformation begins. For the first time, you stop chasing, you stop begging, you stop waiting for another human being to return what they never truly owned, because you realize that your peace was never theirs to give, and it was never theirs to take away. It always belonged to you. The Vedas remind us that every attachment eventually asks a question: will you continue searching for yourself in another person? Or will you finally return to yourself? Most people spend years trying to get the person back. The wiser path is to get yourself back, because the greatest gift hidden inside some heartbreaks is not the relationship you lost. It is the part of yourself you finally found. And perhaps that was the real purpose of their arrival all along. They were never sent merely to be loved. They were sent to reveal where you had forgotten your own wholeness. And the moment you remember it, the chains begin to fall away. Not all at once, but little by little, until one day you no longer need someone else to choose you in order to feel worthy. You no longer need someone else to stay in order to feel complete. You no longer need someone else to validate your existence in order to know your value, because you have returned to the truth that was waiting beneath the attachment all along. The truth that the Vedas have whispered for thousands of years. You were never incomplete. You only forgot. They came to show you the difference between love and dependency. One of the most painful realizations a person can experience is discovering that what they thought was love was actually something else. Not because their feelings were fake, not because their heart was dishonest, but because hidden beneath those feelings was something they could not see at the time. A deep dependency, a silent need, a fear of losing what they believed they could not live without. The Vedas teach that true love and attachment may look similar on the surface, but they are born from entirely different places. Love flows from wholeness. Dependency flows from emptiness. Love says, I appreciate your presence in my life. Dependency says, I cannot be okay without you. Love allows freedom. Dependency creates fear. Love brings peace. Dependency creates anxiety. And many people spend years confusing one for the other. When someone first enters your life and makes you feel understood, valued, seen, or emotionally alive, it is easy to believe that what you are experiencing is pure love. The connection feels powerful. The emotions feel real. The thoughts become constant. The future begins to form itself inside your imagination. You start creating stories about what could be. You begin building dreams around their presence, and slowly, without noticing it, your happiness becomes attached to their choices. You feel excited when they move closer. You feel devastated when they move away. You feel secure when they show affection. You feel lost when they become distant. Your emotional state begins rising and falling according to their behavior. And that is when dependency quietly takes root. Because dependency is not measured by how much you love someone. It is measured by how much power they have over your inner world. The more your peace depends on them, the more vulnerable you become to suffering. The more your identity becomes connected to them, the more frightening the possibility of losing them becomes. This is why some people remain trapped in relationships that continuously hurt them. Not because the relationship is healthy, not because the connection is sacred, but because dependency has convinced them that pain is better than loss. The mind starts negotiating with suffering. It says, Maybe if I try harder, they will change. Maybe if I love them more, they will finally see my value. Maybe if I sacrifice enough of myself, they will become the person I hoped they would be. And so the cycle continues. You keep giving, you keep waiting, you keep hoping, while slowly abandoning yourself in the process. The Vedas warn us about this subtle trap because dependency often disguises itself as devotion. It tells you that your suffering is proof of how deeply you love, but suffering is not always proof of love. Sometimes it is proof that you have forgotten your own worth. Sometimes it is proof that you have placed another human being in a position they were never meant to occupy. No person was meant to become the source of your identity. No person was meant to carry the responsibility of making you feel complete. No person was meant to become the center around which your entire emotional world revolves. Because every human being is imperfect. Every human being changes. Every human being leaves eventually, whether through distance, circumstances, misunderstanding, or time itself. And when your happiness depends entirely on something temporary, fear becomes unavoidable. This is why certain people enter your life and hurt you so deeply. Not because they were meant to destroy your heart, but because they reveal where dependency has been hiding beneath the surface. The person who broke you may have unknowingly shown you something your soul desperately needed to understand. They showed you that you had tied your self-worth to their approval. They showed you that you were seeking validation where you should have been seeking self-knowledge. They showed you that you were looking for security in a place that could never provide lasting security. And although the lesson arrived through pain, it carried tremendous wisdom, because there comes a moment when you stop asking, "Why didn't they love me the way I deserved?" And you begin asking a far more important question. Why did I believe I needed their love in order to feel worthy? That question changes everything, because now the focus shifts. No longer are you trying to fix them. You begin understanding yourself. You begin seeing how much energy was spent trying to earn love instead of recognizing that your value existed before they ever arrived. You begin realizing that the love you were desperately seeking from another person was actually pointing you back towards something deeper within yourself. The Vedas teach that the deepest source of fulfillment can never come from the outside world. Relationships can enrich your life. They can inspire you. They can support your growth. They can bring beauty and companionship, but they cannot become the foundation of your existence. That foundation must come from within. Otherwise, every relationship becomes a burden. Every disagreement becomes a threat. Every moment of distance becomes a source of fear, and every goodbye becomes a personal collapse. The person who hurt you may have shattered an illusion that another human being could complete what was already complete. An illusion that your worth depended on being chosen. An illusion that happiness could be permanently secured through someone else's presence. At first, the breaking of that illusion feels unbearable. It feels like loss. It feels like betrayal. It feels like the end of something precious. But with time, you begin seeing it differently. You begin understanding that the relationship was not only teaching you how to love another person, it was teaching you how to stop abandoning yourself. It was teaching you how to return your power to where it belongs. It was teaching you how to stand in your own worth without needing constant confirmation from the outside world. And perhaps that was the deeper purpose all along, because true love does not begin when someone chooses you. True love begins when you no longer need another person to prove that you are worthy of being loved. The day you learn that lesson, something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing people who cannot see your value. You stop shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's expectations. You stop sacrificing your peace for temporary affection. And for the first time, you begin loving from abundance rather than desperation, from wholeness rather than emptiness, from freedom rather than fear. And that is the moment dependency loses its power. Because you finally understand the truth the Vedas have been teaching for centuries. The deepest love is not the love that makes you dependent on another person. The deepest love is the love that helps you remember who you are without them. They were a mirror sent to reveal the parts of you that needed healing. One of the most profound truths found within Vedic wisdom is that life is constantly reflecting something back to us. Most people believe they are simply experiencing life. The Vedas suggest something deeper. They suggest that life is also showing us ourselves. Every relationship, every challenge, every attraction, every disappointment, and every heartbreak carries a reflection hidden within it. Not because every painful experience is your fault, and not because every person who hurts you is justified, but because every experience contains a lesson about the inner world you carry wherever you go. This is why certain people affect you so deeply. They do more than enter your life. They touch places within you that were already waiting to be seen. They awaken emotions that existed long before they arrived. They uncover wounds that had been buried beneath years of distractions, responsibilities, and temporary comforts. And often, the reason a person becomes unforgettable is not because of who they truly were. It is because of what they awakened inside you. Think about it carefully. Why can one person walk away and you quickly move on, while another person's departure stays in your heart for years? Why can one disappointment be forgotten, while another follows you everywhere? Why can one rejection be accepted, while another shakes your entire sense of self? The answer is often deeper than the person themselves. The answer lies within the wound they touched, because people do not create every wound they trigger. Sometimes they simply expose wounds that were already there. A person who ignores you may awaken old feelings of being unseen. A person who abandons you may awaken ancient fears of rejection. A person who betrays your trust may reopen scars from moments when trust was broken long before they ever entered your life. And suddenly, what looks like a present-day pain becomes connected to years of accumulated emotional experiences. This is why the suffering feels larger than the event itself. The pain is not only coming from what happened today, the pain is also coming from everything that happened before. The Vedas teach that healing begins the moment we stop staring only at the mirror and start paying attention to what the mirror is showing us. Most people remain focused on the person. They replay conversations. They analyze every action. They obsess over what could have been different. They spend years trying to understand the person who hurt them. But true transformation begins when you turn inward and ask a different question. What is this experience trying to reveal about me? That question changes everything, because now the relationship becomes a teacher. Now the pain becomes information. Now the suffering becomes a doorway to self-understanding. Perhaps the person who hurt you revealed how afraid you are of being abandoned. Perhaps they revealed how quickly you sacrifice your needs in order to keep others happy. Perhaps they showed you how often you ignore red flags because you desperately want the connection to work. Perhaps they exposed how much of your worth has become dependent on being accepted by others. Or perhaps they revealed a painful truth you had been avoiding for years, that you have been giving people access to parts of you that you have not yet learned to protect. The mirror is not always comfortable. In fact, it is usually uncomfortable, because mirrors do not show us only what we want to see. They show us what is there. And many of the lessons that transform our lives begin with truths we would rather avoid. This is why the people who hurt us often become our greatest spiritual teachers, not because they are wiser than us, not because their actions were noble, but because they force us to confront aspects of ourselves that comfort would never reveal. Comfort rarely creates deep self-awareness. Pain often does. When life is easy, we continue repeating old patterns without noticing them. When life hurts, those patterns suddenly become impossible to ignore. You begin seeing where your boundaries were weak. You begin noticing where your intuition was speaking, but you refused to listen. You begin recognizing how often you settled for less than your soul deserved. You begin understanding how many decisions were driven by fear rather than wisdom. And little by little, the person who once seemed like the center of the story starts becoming something else. a messenger, a mirror, a catalyst for awakening. This does not mean you should thank them for the pain. It does not mean you should excuse harmful behavior. It simply means you should not waste the lesson, because suffering without awareness creates bitterness, but suffering with awareness creates wisdom. The Vedas remind us that every wound carries two possibilities. One possibility is that it becomes a prison. The other is that it becomes a doorway. Most people remain trapped because they spend their lives staring at the person who caused the wound. The wise learn to walk through the doorway. They ask difficult questions. They face uncomfortable truths. They choose growth over blame. And because of that choice, the wound gradually transforms, not overnight, not without effort, but slowly, silently, powerfully, until one day you realize something extraordinary. The person who hurt you no longer has power over your mind. Their memory no longer controls your emotions. Their absence no longer defines your happiness, because what once felt like destruction has become understanding. What once felt like punishment has become wisdom. And what once felt like the darkest chapter of your life has become the chapter that awakened you. Perhaps that was the hidden purpose all along. Perhaps they were never sent merely to break your heart. Perhaps they were sent to reveal the places within you that were still asking for healing, the places where fear still lived, the places where old wounds still whispered, the places where your soul was waiting to become whole again. And once you understand this, everything changes, because you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and you begin asking, "What is this experience trying to teach me?" That question is where true healing begins. That question is where wisdom is born. And according to the Vedas, wisdom is often the greatest gift hidden inside our deepest pain. They came to break the false identity you built around being chosen. One of the deepest illusions a human being can fall into is the belief that their worth depends on being chosen by someone else. Most people never realize they are carrying this belief. It operates quietly beneath the surface, hidden inside relationships, hidden inside friendships, hidden inside desires, expectations, and emotional attachments. From a very young age, many of us are taught to seek approval. We learn to feel valuable when we are praised. We learn to feel important when we are noticed. We learn to feel worthy when we are accepted. And over time, without realizing it, we begin building our identity around how others respond to us. We start measuring ourselves through other people's eyes. If they admire us, we feel confident. If they approve of us, we feel secure. If they choose us, we feel valuable. But if they reject us, ignore us, or walk away, suddenly everything begins to collapse. This is where suffering quietly enters, because the moment your worth becomes dependent on another person's choice, your peace becomes fragile. The Vedas teach that the true self is beyond praise and beyond rejection. The true self is not increased by someone's love, nor is it diminished by someone's absence. The Atman, the eternal essence within you, does not become more valuable because someone chooses you, and it does not become less valuable because someone leaves. But the ego does not understand this. The ego constantly seeks confirmation from the outside world. It wants proof. It wants recognition. It wants validation. It wants reassurance that it matters, and because of this, it often becomes attached to people who seem capable of providing that validation. This is why some heartbreaks feel far more devastating than others, because what is actually breaking is not only the relationship, it is the identity that was built around that relationship. You may think you are grieving the person, but often you are grieving the version of yourself that existed when they chose you, the version of yourself that felt wanted, the version of yourself that felt important, the version of yourself that believed your future depended on their presence. When they leave, that identity begins to crack, and the cracking feels painful. It feels confusing. It feels unfair, because suddenly you are forced to face a question you have been avoiding for years. Who am I without their approval? Who am I without their attention? Who am I without their validation. Who am I if they never come back? Most people spend months or years trying to answer these questions by chasing the person who left. The Vedic path teaches something different. It teaches that the answer is not found by chasing them. The answer is found by discovering yourself. Because the person who hurt you may have unknowingly exposed a dangerous dependency, not dependency on their presence, dependency on their approval. You were no longer simply enjoying their love. You were using their love as evidence of your worth. And this is why their rejection felt so personal. It did not only feel like they were rejecting a relationship, it felt like they were rejecting you, your value, your significance, your identity. But here is the truth most people never realize. Someone's inability to recognize your worth does not reduce your worth. Someone's decision to leave does not erase your value. Someone's confusion does not define your truth. A flower does not become less beautiful because one person fails to appreciate it. The sun does not stop shining because someone closes their eyes. And your soul does not become less sacred because another human being could not see what was standing before them. The Vedas repeatedly remind us that the deepest source of identity cannot come from the changing opinions of the world, because everything outside you is temporary. People change, relationships change, circumstances change, affection changes, attention changes, the world itself changes. If you build your identity on things that constantly change, your peace will always be unstable. But there is something within you that does not change, something deeper than personality, something deeper than success, something deeper than relationships, something deeper than the roles you play in life. The ancient sages called it the self, the eternal witness, the silent presence beneath every experience, the part of you that existed before anyone chose you, and the part of you that will remain even if everyone leaves. Most people spend their lives searching for someone who will finally make them feel enough. The Vedas invite you to discover something far more powerful. You were already enough before they arrived. The person who hurt you may have been sent into your life to expose the illusion that your worth was dependent on their choice. Because as long as you believe your value comes from being chosen, you will continue living in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being replaced, fear of losing what you have, fear of not being enough. And fear is not freedom. The purpose of life is not to become someone's favorite person. The purpose of life is to awaken to your true nature, to discover the part of yourself that remains whole regardless of who stays and who leaves. This is why some painful endings become powerful spiritual beginnings. Because when the person leaves, the illusion leaves with them. The illusion that they were the source of your value. The illusion that they were responsible for your happiness. The illusion that your identity depended on their affection. And once those illusions begin falling apart, something extraordinary starts happening. You begin seeing yourself differently. You stop trying to earn your worth. You stop begging for recognition. You stop chasing validation. You stop performing for acceptance. You stop shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's expectations. And for the first time, you begin standing on your own inner foundation, a foundation that is not built on praise, not built on attention, not built on approval, but built on self-awareness, built on truth, built on the understanding that your value is inherent. It is not something another person gives you, and it is not something another person can take away. Perhaps this was the hidden purpose of the person who hurt you. Perhaps they were never meant to stay forever. Perhaps they were never meant to become your destination. Perhaps they arrived to shatter the false identity you had unknowingly built around being chosen, so that you could finally discover a deeper truth, a truth that the Vedas have whispered through the centuries. You do not become valuable when someone chooses you. You become free when you no longer need them to. Because the moment you stop seeking your worth in the eyes of others, you begin seeing what was always there. The light within you, the truth within you, the self within you, the part of you that has never needed permission to be worthy, and never will. They came to push you back toward your true path. One of the most difficult truths to accept is that not every painful ending is a mistake. Sometimes what feels like destruction is actually redirection. Sometimes what feels like loss is actually guidance. And sometimes the very person who shattered your plans was unknowingly leading you back toward the life you were meant to live. The Vedas teach that every soul has a path, a deeper purpose, a sacred direction that aligns with its highest growth. This path is known as Dharma. Dharma is more than duty. It is more than responsibility. It is the natural path of your soul. It is the life that becomes possible when you stop living according to fear, attachment, and illusion, and begin living according to truth. Yet many people drift away from this path without realizing it. Not because they are bad people, not because they are weak, but because attachment has a way of pulling us away from ourselves. Sometimes we become so focused on a person that we forget our purpose. We become so invested in a relationship that we neglect our growth. We become so consumed by being chosen that we stop choosing ourselves. And slowly, almost invisibly, our lives begin revolving around someone else's presence. Our dreams become smaller, our standards become weaker, our vision becomes narrower, our energy becomes scattered. Instead of moving toward our highest potential, we start organizing our lives around keeping someone close. We begin sacrificing pieces of ourselves without noticing. We postpone our goals. We ignore our intuition. We silence our inner voice. We tolerate situations that our wiser self would never accept. And all the while we convince ourselves that we are doing it for love. But what if it was never love guiding those choices? What if it was fear? Fear of losing them, fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of facing ourselves. This is why life sometimes introduces a painful interruption. A relationship ends, a betrayal occurs, a disappointment arrives, a door suddenly closes, and at first it feels unbearable, because all you can see is what you lost. You see the future that disappeared, the plans that collapsed, the hopes that never came true, the version of life you imagined but never received. And naturally the heart asks, why did this happen to me? Why did they leave? Why did everything fall apart? But years later, many people look back and realize something astonishing. The thing they once begged life to save was actually the thing preventing them from becoming who they were meant to be. The relationship they desperately wanted to keep was distracting them from their purpose. The person they could not let go of was keeping them attached to a version of themselves they had already outgrown. The door that closed was protecting them from a road that would have taken them further away from their true path. The Vedas remind us that life does not always give us what we want. Sometimes it gives us what our soul needs. And what the soul needs is not always comfortable. Growth rarely begins in comfort. Awakening rarely begins in convenience. Transformation rarely begins when everything is going according to plan. More often, transformation begins when life removes something we believed we could not live without, because only then do we discover what remains. Only then do we discover our strength. Only then do we discover our resilience. Only then do we discover who we are beyond our attachments. Think about some of the strongest people you know. Most of them were not shaped by comfort. They were shaped by challenges, by setbacks, by disappointments, by moments that forced them to rebuild themselves from the inside out. The same is true for you. The person who hurt you may have unknowingly become the catalyst for a profound spiritual awakening. Because after the pain, something started changing. Perhaps you became more aware. Perhaps you became more reflective. Perhaps you began questioning the patterns that had governed your life for years. Perhaps you started searching for deeper meaning. Perhaps you began listening to your intuition again. Perhaps you returned to parts of yourself you had abandoned while chasing someone else's approval. And little by little, a new version of you began emerging. A stronger version, a wiser version, a more conscious version. A version that could finally see what attachment had hidden. The Vedas often describe life as a journey of remembering, not learning something new, remembering something ancient, remembering who you truly are beneath the illusions, remembering the wisdom that already exists within you, remembering the purpose that was there before fear distracted you from it. Sometimes the people who hurt us play a surprising role in that remembering. Their departure creates silence, and in that silence, you finally hear yourself again. Their absence creates space, and in that space, you finally reconnect with your own soul. Their rejection forces you inward, and inward is often where the greatest discoveries are waiting. This is why some endings become sacred, not because they felt good, not because they were fair, not because they were easy, but because they redirected your life towards something greater than your original plans, something greater than your attachment, something greater than your expectations, something greater than your fear. The truth is, there are people you would still be chasing today if life had not intervened. There are situations you would still be trapped in if pain had not forced you to leave. There are versions of yourself that would never have awakened if everything had gone exactly the way you wanted. And perhaps that is one of the deepest lessons hidden within Vedic wisdom. Sometimes the soul's greatest blessings arrive disguised as losses. Sometimes the greatest act of guidance feels like rejection. Sometimes the greatest protection feels like disappointment. And sometimes the person who hurt you was never meant to walk beside you forever. They were meant to push you back toward the path you were always meant to follow. A path that does not depend on another person's approval. A path that does not require you to abandon yourself. A path that leads not toward temporary happiness, but toward inner freedom. Because at the end of the day, your Dharma was never waiting inside another person. It was waiting inside you, and perhaps their role was simply to help you find your way back to it. They came to teach you the sacred difference between forgiveness and returning. One of the greatest misunderstandings in the spiritual journey is the belief that forgiveness means allowing someone back into your life exactly as they were before. Many people carry this confusion for years. They believe that if they are truly spiritual, they must keep giving chances. They must keep understanding. They must keep tolerating. They must keep reopening doors that have already brought pain into their lives. And because of this misunderstanding, they become trapped in cycles that slowly drain their peace, their dignity, and their spirit. The Vedas teach something far deeper. They teach that forgiveness is not about forgetting what happened. It is not about pretending the wound never existed. It is not about convincing yourself that harmful behavior was acceptable. And it is certainly not about allowing the same lesson to repeat endlessly. True forgiveness is an inner act. It is the decision to stop carrying poison in your own heart. It is the moment you release the burden of resentment so it no longer controls your life. Because the longer you carry anger, bitterness, and hatred, the more tightly you remain connected to the very experience you are trying to escape. The person may be gone, but the pain remains alive within you. The memory continues controlling your emotions. The wound continues shaping your decisions. The past continues stealing energy from the present. This is why forgiveness becomes necessary. Not for them, for you. Forgiveness is not a gift you give to someone who hurt you. It is a gift you give to your own soul. It is the moment you decide that another person's actions will no longer occupy space inside your heart. But forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. This is where many people become confused. You can forgive someone and still choose distance. You can release resentment and still protect your peace. You can wish someone well and still understand that they no longer belong in your life. The Vedas teach balance, compassion balanced with wisdom, kindness balanced with discernment, an open heart balanced with clear boundaries. Because wisdom understands something that attachment often forgets. Not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay, and not everyone who receives your forgiveness deserves continued access to your energy. Some people apologize because they have changed. Others apologize because they want access again. Some people regret hurting you. Others simply regret facing the consequences of their actions. And if you are not careful, compassion without wisdom can lead you back into the very suffering you worked so hard to overcome. This is why painful experiences often become powerful teachers. They teach you the value of boundaries. They teach you that protecting your peace is not selfish, it is necessary. Many people believe boundaries are walls. The Vedas suggest something different. Healthy boundaries are not walls built from hatred. They are gates built from wisdom. A wall says, no one may enter. A gate says entry must be earned. And there is a profound difference between the two. The person who hurt you may have entered your life to teach you this lesson. Before them, Perhaps you believed that being loving meant saying yes to everyone. Perhaps you believed that kindness meant endless availability. Perhaps you believed that compassion required self-sacrifice. Perhaps you believed that a good person never walks away, but life eventually teaches a different truth. Sometimes walking away is an act of self-respect. Sometimes distance is an act of wisdom. Sometimes saying no is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. Because when you continuously allow people to cross your boundaries, you are teaching them how to treat you. And more importantly, you are teaching yourself what you are willing to tolerate. The Vedas remind us that every action leaves an imprint on the soul. Every time you ignore your own truth to please someone else, an imprint is created. Every time you silence your intuition, an imprint is created. Every time you abandon your self-respect to maintain a connection, an imprint is created. Over time, these small compromises accumulate, and eventually you wake up feeling disconnected from yourself, not because someone else stole your peace, but because you repeatedly surrendered it. This is why some painful relationships become spiritual turning points. They force you to ask questions you never asked before. What am I allowing? What am I tolerating? What am I teaching people about my value? Why do I continue giving access to those who continuously create suffering? And perhaps the most important question of all, why am I protecting their feelings more than I am protecting my own peace? The answers to these questions often change a person's life, because eventually you realize that forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is strength. It takes strength to release resentment. It takes strength to stop replaying old wounds. It takes strength to choose peace when anger feels easier. But it also takes strength to walk away from what no longer serves your growth. It takes strength to honor your boundaries. It takes strength to choose yourself after years of choosing everyone else. And this is where true spiritual maturity begins. Not when you become endlessly tolerant. Not when you allow people to hurt you repeatedly. Not when you sacrifice your well-being in the name of compassion. But when your heart becomes both soft and wise. Soft enough to forgive. Wise enough to learn. Soft enough to release hatred. Wise enough not to repeat the same mistake. Soft enough to wish others well. Wise enough to recognize when their journey is no longer meant to be part of yours. The person who hurt you may have arrived to teach you this sacred balance. The balance between love and self-respect. The balance between compassion and discernment. The balance between forgiveness and access. Because many people learn how to open their hearts. Few people learn how to protect them. And according to the deeper wisdom of the Vedas, both are necessary. A truly awakened heart is not a heart that trusts everyone. It is a heart that remains loving without becoming naive. It remains compassionate without becoming self-destructive. It remains open without losing wisdom. And perhaps that was the hidden lesson behind your pain. Not simply to learn how to forgive, but to learn how to forgive without abandoning yourself, to learn how to release the past without reopening the wound, to learn how to let go with grace while still honoring your worth. Because there comes a moment in every spiritual journey when you finally understand you can send someone love from a distance. You can forgive them without following them. You can release them without returning to them. And sometimes the most powerful act of forgiveness is not inviting someone back into your life. It is peacefully moving forward without them, not with anger, not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with wisdom. And that wisdom becomes one of the greatest gifts the experience ever gave you. They came to teach you how to trust your inner voice again. One of the quietest truths in Vedic wisdom is also one of the most powerful. Long before life sends a lesson, it often sends a whisper. Long before a relationship falls apart, something inside you already knows. Long before the betrayal becomes visible, a subtle feeling appears. Long before the disappointment arrives, your soul senses a disturbance in the flow. But most people do not listen, not because they are foolish, not because they lack intelligence, but because the heart often wants what the soul already knows is not right. This creates an inner conflict that almost everyone experiences at some point in life. There is the voice of desire, and there is the voice of wisdom. Desire says, maybe it will work. Wisdom says, pay attention. Desire says, give it one more chance. Wisdom says, look at the pattern. Desire says, don't lose this person. Wisdom says, don't lose yourself. The tragedy is that many people spend years listening to desire while ignoring wisdom. And eventually, life must teach the lesson more loudly. The Vedas speak of an inner intelligence that exists beyond the restless mind, a deeper awareness, a quiet knowing, a sacred guidance that speaks through intuition, stillness, and subtle feelings rather than words. This guidance rarely shouts. It does not argue. It does not force. It simply whispers, and if ignored long enough, life begins speaking on its behalf. Think back to the people who hurt you. If you are completely honest with yourself, there were probably signs, not obvious signs, not dramatic signs, but small moments that did not feel right. A strange feeling after certain conversations, a discomfort you could not explain, a sense that something was missing beneath the surface, a recurring feeling that their words and actions did not fully align, a quiet unease that appeared whenever you imagined a future with them. At the time, you may have dismissed those feelings. You may have told yourself you were overthinking. You may have convinced yourself to be patient. You may have ignored your instincts because your hopes were louder than your awareness. After all, when we want something badly enough, we become experts at explaining away what we do not want to see. We call inconsistency a temporary phase. We call disrespect a misunderstanding. We call emotional unavailability a difficult season. We call repeated patterns isolated incidents. We create explanations because accepting the truth would require us to make difficult decisions, and difficult decisions often come with painful endings. So we wait, we hope, we justify, we convince ourselves that things will somehow change, until one day, reality reveals what intuition had been quietly trying to tell us all along. This is one of life's most painful experiences, not because someone hurt us, but because we realize we abandoned our own inner wisdom. The Vedas teach that suffering often increases when we betray our own knowing, because every time we ignore our truth, we create distance between ourselves and our inner guidance. Every time we silence our intuition, we weaken our trust in ourselves. Every time we choose comfort over truth, we postpone a lesson that will eventually return. This is why some people enter your life, not merely to hurt you. They enter your life to rebuild your relationship with your own wisdom. Before them, perhaps you trusted everyone except yourself. Perhaps you looked outside for answers, outside for validation, outside for certainty, outside for direction. But after the experience, something begins changing. You become more aware, more observant, more conscious of energy, more attentive to actions than promises. You stop being hypnotized by potential. You start paying attention to reality. You stop falling in love with who someone could become. You begin seeing who they are, and that shift changes everything. Because wisdom does not judge people by their intentions alone. Wisdom watches patterns. Wisdom observes consistency. Wisdom pays attention to what repeatedly happens, rather than what occasionally happens. This is why painful experiences often become powerful teachers. They train your awareness. They sharpen your discernment. They strengthen your connection to your inner voice, the very voice you once ignored. Many people think intuition is something mystical. The Vedas describe it more simply. It is the intelligence of the soul, the part of you that sees clearly when the mind is clouded by attachment, the part of you that recognizes truth when emotions are creating confusion, the part of you that notices what your desires are trying to hide, and the more you listen to it, the stronger it becomes. The more you ignore it, the quieter it becomes. This is why some of the greatest lessons arrive through disappointment, because disappointment forces us to return to ourselves. It forces us to stop blindly trusting appearances. It forces us to stop outsourcing our judgment. It forces us to reconnect with the wisdom that has always existed within. The person who hurt you may have unknowingly become a teacher in this process, not because their actions were noble, not because their behavior was justified, but because their presence revealed the cost of ignoring your own truth. And once that lesson is learned, You begin moving through life differently. You no longer ignore red flags because someone is attractive. You no longer abandon your values because someone gives you attention. You no longer sacrifice your peace because someone promises a future. You no longer silence your intuition in exchange for temporary comfort. Instead, you begin trusting yourself, not arrogantly, not fearfully, but deeply, calmly, wisely, because there comes a moment when you realize something profound. The greatest betrayal is not always when someone lies to you. Sometimes the greatest betrayal is when you repeatedly ignore what your own soul has been trying to tell you. And the greatest healing is not always finding the right person. Sometimes the greatest healing is learning to trust yourself again, to trust what you feel, to trust what you observe, to trust what your spirit recognizes, to trust the quiet wisdom that exists beneath fear, desire, and attachment. The Vedas remind us that truth is always available. The challenge is not hearing it. The challenge is having the courage to listen. Perhaps that is why this person entered your life. Perhaps they were never meant to stay forever. Perhaps they were never meant to become your destination. Perhaps they came to remind you of something you had forgotten. That deep within you is a wisdom older than fear, a guidance deeper than emotion, a truth that cannot be manipulated by appearances. And when you finally reconnect with that truth, something beautiful happens. You stop searching for certainty in other people. You begin finding it within yourself. And from that moment forward, your life is no longer guided by attachment. It is guided by awareness, because the voice you were searching for outside yourself was quietly waiting within you all along. They were never the end of your story. They were the beginning of your awakening. When someone hurts you deeply, it rarely feels like a lesson in the beginning. It feels like an ending. It feels like something precious has been taken from you. It feels like a chapter of your life has been ripped apart before you were ready to let it go. You replay conversations, you revisit memories, you search for explanations. You wonder what you could have done differently. You wonder whether things could have been saved. And perhaps the hardest question of all begins haunting your mind. Why did this have to happen? At first it seems like the pain is only taking things away. It takes your certainty. It takes your trust. It takes your sense of security. It takes the future you imagined. And for a while, all you can see is what has been lost. But the Vedas invite us to look beyond the immediate pain. They teach that life often hides its greatest transformations inside its most difficult endings. Because what feels like the collapse of one chapter may actually be the opening of another, a chapter you could not yet see, a chapter your current perspective could not yet understand, a chapter your soul had been moving toward long before your mind became aware of it. The truth is, some people are not sent into your life to stay. They are sent to awaken. They are sent to shake something loose. They are sent to challenge old beliefs. They are sent to expose hidden attachments. They are sent to force a level of growth that comfort could never create. And while they may leave, the awakening remains. Think about who you were before the pain, before the heartbreak, before the disappointment, before the betrayal. You may have been kind. You may have been loving. You may have been hopeful. But perhaps there were also parts of yourself that were still asleep. Parts of yourself that had not yet been challenged. Parts of yourself that had not yet discovered their own strength. Parts of yourself that still depended on the outside world for validation, direction, or identity. Then life introduced a painful teacher, and everything changed, not overnight, not immediately, but slowly, silently, profoundly. At first, the experience breaks you open, but eventually something extraordinary begins emerging from those cracks. Awareness. You begin noticing patterns you once ignored. You begin recognizing red flags you once overlooked. You begin understanding yourself at a deeper level. You begin questioning beliefs that once controlled your life. You begin seeing the difference between attachment and love, between attention and respect, between fantasy and reality, between needing someone and genuinely caring for them. This awareness is the beginning of awakening. Because awakening is not simply learning new information. Awakening is seeing life differently, seeing yourself differently, seeing your experiences through a deeper lens. The Vedas teach that true growth often begins when illusion ends, and many times the people who hurt us are the ones who accidentally destroy our illusions. They destroy the illusion that happiness comes from another person. They destroy the illusion that our worth depends on being chosen. They destroy the illusion that security can be found in things that constantly change. They destroy the illusion that someone else can complete what is already whole within us. At the time, it feels cruel, but years later, many people realize that the pain gave them something comfort never could. Clarity, wisdom, self-respect, inner strength, a deeper relationship with themselves, and perhaps most importantly, a deeper relationship with life itself. Because once you have walked through genuine heartbreak, you begin understanding things that cannot be learned from books. You understand impermanence. You understand resilience. You understand the importance of boundaries. You understand the value of self-awareness. You understand how precious inner peace truly is. And these lessons stay with you forever. The person may leave, but the wisdom remains. The relationship may end, but the growth continues. The chapter may close, but the transformation lives on. This is why the Vedas often describe suffering as a doorway, not because suffering is desirable, not because pain should be romanticized, but because suffering has the power to awaken aspects of consciousness that comfort rarely touches. When everything is easy, people rarely question themselves. When everything is comfortable, people rarely seek deeper truths. When everything is going according to plan, people rarely discover the depths of their own spirit. But pain changes that. Pain makes people look inward. Pain makes people reflect. Pain makes people ask deeper questions. Pain strips away illusions. And when illusions disappear, truth becomes easier to see. Perhaps that is why some of the most awakened souls have also endured some of life's deepest wounds. Not because suffering made them special, but because suffering pushed them toward self-discovery. The same may be true for you. The person who hurt you may not have been the greatest chapter of your life, but they may have been the chapter that changed everything. The chapter that forced you to wake up. The chapter that forced you to grow. The chapter that forced you to stop abandoning yourself. The chapter that forced you to discover strengths you never knew existed, because before the pain, you were searching for someone else. After the pain, you began finding yourself, and that is a profound transformation. Many people spend their entire lives looking outward, looking for love, looking for approval, looking for completion, looking for someone to rescue them from their own emptiness. But awakening begins when the search turns inward, when you realize that what you were seeking outside yourself was pointing towards something already living within. The Vedas have whispered this truth for thousands of years. The journey is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you have always been, remembering the strength beneath the fear, remembering the peace beneath the chaos, remembering the wisdom beneath the confusion, remembering the self beneath all the temporary roles and identities. And sometimes, the people who hurt us play an unexpected role in that remembering, not because they were heroes, not because they were meant to stay, but because their departure created the conditions for your awakening. The ending they brought became the beginning you never expected. The loss became a teacher, the wound became a doorway, the pain became a catalyst, and the person who once seemed like the center of your story gradually became something else. A chapter, an important chapter, a painful chapter, a transformative chapter, but still only a chapter, not the entire book, because your story did not end when they hurt you. Your story did not end when they left. Your story did not end when your heart broke. In many ways, that is where your real journey began. The journey back to yourself. The journey back to truth. The journey back to the wisdom that was waiting beneath the pain all along. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all. The people who hurt you were never random. They were part of your awakening, not because they were meant to define your future, but because they were meant to reveal your strength, not because they were your destination, but because they helped guide you toward it. And one day, when you look back on the chapter that once caused you so much pain, you may finally understand something your heart could not understand at the time. They were not the end of your story. They were the beginning of your transformation. They were not the reason your life fell apart. They were the reason you finally began becoming who you were meant to be. So if there is one thing I hope you carry with you after listening to these teachings, let it be this: the people who hurt you were not necessarily sent to stay, and they were not sent to define your worth. They were sent to reveal something about your attachments, something about your wounds, something about your inner strength, something about the parts of yourself that were waiting to awaken. The Vedas remind us that life is not happening against us. Life is constantly trying to teach us, guide us, and bring us closer to our highest self, even through experiences we never asked for, even through heartbreak, even through disappointment, even through the people who left scars where we once hoped to find love. Perhaps the greatest mistake we can make is spending years asking why someone hurt us, because that question keeps us trapped inside the past. A far more powerful question is this: what did this experience come to teach me? That question changes everything, because the moment you stop seeing yourself as a victim of the experience, you begin becoming a student of it. And students grow, students evolve. Students awaken. The pain that once felt meaningless begins revealing its purpose. The wounds begin turning into wisdom. The confusion begins turning into clarity. And slowly the burden you carried starts becoming lighter. Not because the past changes, but because you change. You begin understanding that your worth was never determined by who stayed. Your value was never determined by who left. Your destiny was never dependent on another person's ability to recognize your light. The truth is, every person who entered your life left something behind. Some left love, some left memories, some left lessons, and some left awakenings that would shape the rest of your journey. Honor the lesson, keep the wisdom, release the pain, and continue walking forward, because your story is far greater than the chapter that hurt you. Your future is far greater than the person who left, and the soul you are becoming is far more powerful than the suffering you have survived. One day, you will look back at the people who once caused you pain and see them differently, not with bitterness, not with resentment, not even with regret, but with understanding, because you will finally realize that they were never the destination. They were part of the path, a path that was always leading you back to yourself. And perhaps that is the deepest wisdom of all. The people who hurt you were never random, but neither was your healing, neither was your growth, neither was your awakening. Everything was guiding you toward the person you were meant to become. So trust the journey, trust the lesson, trust the wisdom hidden within every experience, and above all, trust the self within you, the part that was never broken, never lost, and never diminished by anything that happened along the way, because that is who you truly are. And that is where real freedom begins,